Chapter 24. Sectum Sempra. Exhausted but delighted with his night's work, Harry told Ron and Hermione everything that had happened during next morning's charms lesson, having first cast the Muffliato spell upon those nearest them. They were both satisfyingly impressed by the way he had wheedled the memory out of Slughorn, and positively awed when he told them about Voldemort's Horcruxes and Dumbledore's promise to take Harry along should he find another one. "Wow," said Ron when Harry had finally finished telling them everything. Ron was waving his wand very vaguely in the direction of the ceiling without paying the slightest bit of attention to what he was doing. "Wow, you're actually going to go with Dumbledore and try and destroy... Wow." "Ron, you're making it snow," said Hermione patiently, grabbing his wrist and redirecting his wand away from the ceiling, from which, sure enough, large white flakes had started to fall. Lavender Brown, Harry noticed, glared at Hermione from a neighboring table through very red eyes, and Hermione immediately let go of Ron's arm. "Oh, yeah," said Ron, looking down at his shoulders in a vague surprise. "Sorry, looks like we've all got horrible dandruff now." He brushed some of the fake snow off Hermione's shoulder. Lavender burst into tears. Ron looked immensely guilty and turned his back on her. "We split up," he told Harry out of the corner of his mouth. "Last night, when she saw me coming out of the dormitory with Hermione, obviously she couldn't see you, so she thought it had just been the two of us." "Ah," said Harry. "Well, you don't mind it's over, do you?" "No," said Ron. "It was pretty bad when she was yelling, but at least I didn't have to finish it." "Coward," said Hermione, though she looked amused. "Well, it was a bad night for romance all around. Ginny and Dean split up too, Harry." Harry thought there was a rather knowing look in her eye as she told him that, but she could not possibly know that his insides were suddenly dancing the conga. Keeping his face as immobile and his voice as indifferent as he could, he asked, "How come?" "Oh, something really silly. She said he was always trying to help her through the portrait hole like she couldn't climb in herself, but they've been a bit rocky for ages." Harry glanced over at Dean on the other side of the classroom. He certainly looked unhappy. "Of course, this puts you in a bit of a dilemma, doesn't it?" said Hermione. "What do you mean?" said Harry quickly. "The Quidditch team," said Hermione. "If Ginny and Dean aren't speaking..." Oh, yeah," said Harry. "Flitwick," said Ron in a warning tone. The tiny little Charms Master was bobbing his way toward them, and Hermione was the only one who had managed to turn vinegar into wine. Her glass flask was full of deep crimson liquid, whereas the contents of Harry's and Ron's were still murky brown. Now, boys," squeaked Professor Flitwick reproachfully. "A little less talk, a little more action. Let me see you try." Together they raised their wands, concentrating with all their might, and pointed them at their flasks. Harry's vinegar turned to ice. Ron's flask exploded. "Yes, for homework," said Professor Flitwick, re-emerging from under the table and pulling shards of glass out of the top of his hat. "Practice." They had one of their rare joint free periods after charms and walked back to the common room together. Ron seemed to be positively light-hearted about the end of his relationship with Lavender, and Hermione seemed cheery too, though when asked what she was grinning about, she simply said, "It's a nice day." Neither of them seemed to have noticed that a fierce battle was raging inside Harry's brain. "She's Ron's sister, but she's ditched Dean. She's still Ron's sister. I'm his best mate. That'll make it worse. If I talked to him first, he'd hit you. What if I don't care? He's your best mate." Harry barely noticed that they were climbing through the portrait hole into the sunny common room, and only vaguely registered the small group of seventh years clustered together there, until Hermione cried, "Katie, you're back! Are you okay?" Harry stared. It was indeed Katie Bell, looking completely healthy and surrounded by her jubilant friends. "I'm really well," she said happily. "They let me out of St. Mungo's on Monday. I had a couple of days at home with Mum and Dad, and then came back here this morning. Leanne was just telling me about McLagan in the last match, Harry." "Yeah," said Harry. "Well, now you're back in Ron's fit, we'll have a decent chance of thrashing Ravenclaw, which means we could still be in the running for the cup. Listen, Katie." He had to put the question to her at once. His curiosity even drove Ginny temporarily from his brain. He dropped his voice as Katie's friends started to gather up their things. Apparently, they were late for Transfiguration. "That necklace. Can you remember who gave it to you now?" "No," said Katie, shaking her head ruefully. "Everyone's been asking me, but I haven't got a clue. The last thing I remember was walking into the ladies and the 3 broomsticks." "You definitely went to the bathroom then," said Hermione. "Well, I know I pushed open the door," said Katie, "so I suppose whoever imperioused me was standing just behind it. After that, my memory's a blank until about 2 weeks ago in St. Mungo's. Listen, I'd better go. I wouldn't put it past McGonagall to give me lines, even if it is my first day back. She caught up her bag and books and hurried after her friends, leaving Harry, Ron, and Hermione to sit down at the window table and ponder what she had told them. So, it must have been a girl or woman who gave Katie the necklace, said Hermione, to be in the ladies' bathroom. Or someone who looked like a girl or a woman, said Harry. Don't forget, there was a cauldron full of Polyjuice potion at Hogwarts. We know some of it got stolen. In his mind's eye, he watched a parade of crabs and goyles prance past, all transformed into girls. I think I'm going to take another swig of Felix, said Harry, and have a go at the Room of Requirement again. That would be a complete waste of potion, said Hermione flatly, putting down the copy of Spellman's syllabary she had just taken out of her bag. Luck can only get you so far, Harry. The situation with Slughorn was different. You always had the ability to persuade him. You just needed to tweak the circumstances a bit. Luck isn't going to get you through a powerful enchantment, though. Don't go wasting the rest of that potion. You'll need all the luck you can get if Dumbledore takes you along with him. She dropped her voice to a whisper. Couldn't we make some more? Ron asked Harry, ignoring Hermione. It'd be great to have a stock of it. Have a look in the book. Harry pulled his copy of Advanced Potion Making out of his bag and looked up Felix Felicis. Blimey, it's seriously complicated, he said, running an eye down the list of ingredients. And it takes 6 months. You've got to let it stew. Typical, said Ron. Harry was about to put his book away again when he noticed the corner of a page folded down. Turning to it, he saw the Sectum Sempra spell captioned 4 enemies that he had marked a few weeks previously. He had still not found out what it did, mainly because he did not want to test it around Hermione, but he was considering trying it out on McLaggen next time he came up behind him unawares. The only person who was not particularly pleased to see Katie Bell back at school was Dean Thomas, because he would no longer be required to fill her place as chaser. He took the blow stoically enough when Harry told him, merely grunting and shrugging, but Harry had the distinct feeling as he walked away that Dean and Seamus were muttering mutinously behind his back. The following fortnight saw the best Quidditch practices Harry had known as captain. His team was so pleased to be rid of McLaggen, so glad to have Katie back at last, that they were flying extremely well. Ginny did not seem at all upset about the breakup with Dean. On the contrary, she was the life and soul of the team. Her imitations of Ron anxiously bobbing up and down in front of the goalposts as the quaffle sped toward him, or of Harry bellowing orders at McLaggen before knocking him out cold, kept them all highly amused. Harry, laughing with the others, was glad to have an innocent reason to look at Ginny. He had received several more bludger injuries during practice because he had not been keeping his eyes on the snitch. The battle still raged inside his head. Ginny or Ron? Sometimes he thought that the post-Lavender Ron might not mind too much if he asked Ginny out, but then he remembered Ron's expression when he had seen her kissing Dean, and was sure that Ron would consider it base treachery if Harry so much as held her hand. Yet Harry could not help himself talking to Ginny, laughing with her, walking back from practice with her. However much his conscience ached, he found himself wondering how best to get her on her own. It would have been ideal if Slughorn had given another of one of his little parties, for Ron would not be around, but unfortunately Slughorn seemed to have given them up. Once or twice Harry considered asking Hermione's help, but he did not think he could stand seeing the smug look on her face. He thought he caught it sometimes when Hermione spotted him staring at Ginny or laughing at her jokes. And to complicate matters, he had the nagging worry that if he didn't do it, somebody else was sure to ask Ginny out soon. He and Ron were at least agreed on the fact that she was too popular for her own good. All in all, the temptation to take another gulp of Felix Felicis was becoming stronger by the day, for surely this was a case for, as Hermione put it, tweaking the circumstances. The balmy days slid gently through May, and Ron seemed to be there at Harry's shoulder every time he saw Ginny. Harry found himself longing for a stroke of luck that would somehow cause Ron to realize that nothing would make him happier than his best friend and his sister falling for each other, and to leave them alone together for longer than a few seconds. There seemed no chance of either while the final Quidditch game of the season was looming. Ron wanted to talk tactics with Harry all the time, and had little thought for anything else. Ron was not unique in this respect. Interest in the Gryffindor-Ravenclaw game was running extremely high throughout the school for the match, and it would decide the championship, which was still wide open. If Gryffindor beat Ravenclaw by a margin of 300 points, a tall order, and yet Harry had never known his team to fly better, then they would win the championship. If they won by less than 300 points, they would come second to Ravenclaw. If they lost by 100 points, they would be third behind Hufflepuff, and if they lost by more than 100, they would be in fourth place, and nobody, Harry thought, would ever let him forget that it had been he who had captained Gryffindor to their first bottom-of-the-table defeat in 2 centuries. The run-up to this crucial match had all the usual features. Members of rival houses attempting to intimidate opponent teams in the corridors, unpleasant chants about individual players being rehearsed loudly as they passed, the team members themselves either swaggering around enjoying all the attention, or else dashing into bathrooms between classes to throw up. Somehow, the game had become inextricably linked in Harry's mind with success or failure in his plans for Ginny. He could not help feeling that if they won by more than 300 points, the scenes of euphoria and a nice loud after-match party might be just as good as a hearty swig of Felix Felicis. In the midst of all his preoccupations, Harry had not forgotten his other ambition, finding out what Malfoy was up to in the Room of Requirement. He was still checking the Marauders' map, and as he was unable to locate Malfoy on it, deduced that Malfoy was still spending plenty of time within the room. Although Harry was losing hope that he would ever succeed in getting inside the Room of Requirement, he attempted it whenever he was in the vicinity, but no matter how he reworded his request, the wall remained firmly doorless. A few days before the match against Ravenclaw, Harry found himself walking down to dinner alone from the common room, Ron having rushed off into a nearby bathroom to throw up yet again, and Hermione having dashed off to see Professor Vector about a mistake she thought she might have made in her last arithmancy essay. More out of habit than anything, Harry made his usual detour along the 7th floor corridor, checking the Marauders' map as he went. For a moment he could not find Malfoy anywhere and assumed he must indeed be inside the Room of Requirement again. But then he saw Malfoy's tiny labeled dot, standing in a boys' bathroom on the floor below, accompanied not by Crabbe or Goyle, but by Moaning Myrtle. Harry only stopped staring at this unlikely coupling when he walked right into a suit of armor. The loud crash brought him out of his reverie. Hurrying from the scene lest Filch turn up, he dashed down the marble staircase and along the passageway below. Outside the bathroom, he pressed his ear against the door. He could not hear anything. He very quietly pushed the door open. Draco Malfoy was standing with his back to the door, his hands clutching either side of the sink, his white blonde head bowed. "Don't," crooned Moaning Myrtle's voice from one of the cubicles. "Don't. Tell me what's wrong. I can help you." "No one can help me," said Malfoy. His whole body was shaking. "I can't do it. I can't. It won't work. And unless I do it soon, he says he'll kill me." And Harry realized with a shock so huge it seemed to root him to the spot that Malfoy was crying. Actually crying. Tears streaming down his pale face into the grimy basin. Malfoy gasped and gulped, and then with a great shudder looked up into the cracked mirror and saw Harry staring at him over his shoulder. Malfoy wheeled around, drawing his wand. Instinctively, Harry pulled out his own. Malfoy's hex missed Harry by inches, shattering the lamp on the wall beside him. Harry threw himself sideways, thought Levi Corpus, and flicked his wand, but Malfoy blocked the jinx and raised his wand for another. No, stop it!" squealed Moaning Myrtle, her voice echoing loudly around the tiled room. "Stop! Stop!" There was a loud bang, and the bin behind Harry exploded. Harry attempted a leg locker curse that backfired off the wall behind Malfoy's ear and smashed the cistern beneath Moaning Myrtle, who screamed loudly. Water poured everywhere, and Harry slipped as Malfoy, his face contorted, cried, "Cruci! Sectum Sempra!" bellowed Harry from the floor, waving his wand wildly. Blood spurted from Malfoy's face and chest as though he had been slashed with an invisible sword. He staggered backward and collapsed onto the waterlogged floor with a great splash, his wand falling from his limp right hand. "No," gasped Harry. Slipping and staggering, Harry got to his feet and plunged toward Malfoy, whose face was now shining scarlet, his white hands scrabbling at his blood-soaked chest. "No, I didn't..." Harry did not know what he was saying. He fell to his knees beside Malfoy, who was shaking uncontrollably in a pool of his own blood. Moaning Myrtle let out a deafening scream. "Murder! Murder in the bathroom! Murder!" The door banged open behind Harry, and he looked up, terrified. Snape had burst into the room, his face livid. Pushing Harry roughly aside, he knelt over Malfoy, drew his wand, and traced it over the deep wounds Harry's curse had made, muttering an incantation that sounded almost like a song. The flow of blood seemed to ease. Snape wiped the residue from Malfoy's face and repeated his spell. Now the wounds seemed to be knitting. Harry was still watching, horrified by what he had done, barely aware that he too was soaked in blood and water. Moaning Myrtle was still sobbing and wailing overhead. When Snape had performed his counter-curse for the third time, he half lifted Malfoy into a standing position. You need the hospital wing. There may be a certain amount of scarring, but if you take Dittany immediately, we may avoid even that. Come." He supported Malfoy across the bathroom, turning at the door to say in a voice of cold fury, "And you, Potter, you wait here for me." It did not occur to Harry for a second to disobey. He stood up slowly, shaking, and looked down at the wet floor. There were bloodstains floating like crimson flowers across its surface. He could not even find it in himself to tell Moaning Myrtle to be quiet as she continued to wail and sob with increasingly evident enjoyment. Snape returned 10 minutes later. He stepped into the bathroom and closed the door behind him. "Go," he said to Myrtle, and she swooped back into her toilet at once, leaving a ringing silence behind her. "I didn't mean it to happen," said Harry at once. His voice echoed in the cold, watery space. "I didn't know what that spell did." But Snape ignored this. "Apparently, I underestimated you, Potter," he said quietly. "Who would have thought you knew such dark magic? Who taught you that spell?" I read about it somewhere." "Where?" "It was a library book," Harry invented wildly. "I can't remember what it was called." "Liar," said Snape. Harry's throat went dry. He knew what Snape was going to do, and he had never been able to prevent it. The bathroom seemed to shimmer before his eyes. He struggled to block out all thought, but try as he might, the Half-Blood Prince's copy of Advanced Potion Making swam hazily to the forefront of his mind. And then he was staring at Snape again, in the midst of this wrecked, soaked bathroom. He stared into Snape's black eyes, hoping against hope that Snape had not seen what he feared. But, "Bring me your school bag," said Snape softly, "and all of your school books. All of them. Bring them to me here. Now!" There was no point arguing. Harry turned at once and splashed out of the bathroom. Once in the corridor, he broke into a run toward Gryffindor Tower. Most people were walking the other way. They gaped at him, drenched in water and blood, but he answered none of the questions fired at him as he ran past. He felt stunned. It was as though a beloved pet had turned suddenly savage. What had the prince been thinking to copy such a spell into his book? And what would happen when Snape saw it? Would he tell Slughorn? Harry's stomach churned. How Harry had been achieving such good results in potions all year? Would he confiscate or destroy the book that had taught Harry so much? The book that had become a kind of guide and friend. Harry could not let it happen. He could not. Why are you soaking? Is that blood?" Ron was standing at the top of the stairs, looking bewildered at the sight of Harry. "I need your book," Harry panted. "Your potions book. Quick, give it to me." "But what about the Half-Blood? I'll explain later." Ron pulled his copy of Advanced Potion Making out of his bag and handed it over. Harry sprinted off past him and back to the common room. Here, he seized his school bag, ignoring the amazed looks of several people who had already finished their dinner, threw himself back out of the porthole, and hurtled off along the 7th floor corridor. He skidded to a halt beside the tapestry of dancing trolls, closed his eyes, and began to walk. "I need a place to hide my book. I need a place to hide my book. I need a place to hide my book." 3 times he walked up and down in front of the stretch of blank wall. When he opened his eyes, there it was at last, the door to the Room of Requirement. Harry wrenched it open, flung himself inside, and slammed it shut. He gasped. Despite his haste, his panic, his fear of what awaited him back in the bathroom, he could not help but be overawed by what he was looking at. He was standing in a room the size of a large cathedral, whose high windows were sending shafts of light down upon what looked like a city with towering walls built of what Harry knew must be objects hidden by generations of Hogwarts inhabitants. There were alleyways and roads bordered by teetering piles of broken and damaged furniture, stowed away perhaps to hide evidence of mishandled magic, or else hidden by castle-proud house elves. There were thousands and thousands of books, no doubt banned or graffitied or stolen. There were winged catapults and fanged frisbees, some still with enough life in them to hover half-heartedly over the mountains of other forbidden items. There were chipped bottles of congealed potions, hats, jewels, cloaks. There were what looked like dragon eggshells, corked bottles whose contents still shimmered evilly, several rustling swords, and a heavy, blood-stained axe. Harry hurried forward into one of the many alleyways between all of this hidden treasure. He turned right past an enormous stuffed troll, ran on a short way, took a left at the broken vanishing cabinet in which Montague had got lost the previous year, finally pausing behind a large cupboard that seemed to have had acid thrown at its blistered surface. He opened one of the cupboard's creaking doors. It had already been used as a hiding place for something in a cage that had long since died. Its skeleton had 5 legs. He stuffed the Half-Blood Prince's book behind the cage and slammed the door. He paused for a moment, his heart thumping horribly, gazing around at the clutter. Would he be able to find this spot again amidst all this junk? Seizing the chipped bust of an ugly old warlock from on top of a nearby crate, he stood it on top of the cupboard, where the book was now hidden, perched a dusty old wig and a tarnished tiara on the statue's head to make it more distinctive, then sprinted back through the alleyways of hidden junk as fast as he could go, back to the door, back out onto the corridor, where he slammed the door behind him, and it turned once more back into stone. Harry ran flat out toward the bathroom on the floor below, cramming Ron's copy of Advanced Potion Making into his bag as he did so. A minute later, he was back in front of Snape, who held out his hand wordlessly for Harry's school bag. Harry handed it over, panting, a searing pain in his chest, and waited. One by one, Snape extracted Harry's books and examined them. Finally, the only book left was the potions book, which he looked at very carefully before speaking. "This is your copy of Advanced Potion Making, is it, Potter?" "Yes," said Harry, still breathing hard. "You're quite sure of that, are you, Potter?" "Yes," said Harry with a touch more defiance. "This is the copy of Advanced Potion Making that you purchased from Flourish and Blotts." "Yes," said Harry firmly. "Then why," asked Snape, "does it have the name Runel Waslib written inside the front cover?" Harry's heart missed a beat. "That's my nickname," he said. "Your nickname," repeated Snape. "Yeah, that's what my friends call me," said Harry. "I understand what a nickname is," said Snape. The cold black eyes were boring once more into Harry's. He tried not to look into them. Close your mind, but he had never learned how to do it properly. "Do you know what I think, Potter?" said Snape very quietly. "I think that you are a liar and a cheat, and that you deserve detention with me every Saturday until the end of term. What do you think, Potter?" I don't agree, sir," said Harry, still refusing to look into Snape's eyes. "Well, we shall see how you feel after your detentions," said Snape. 10 o'clock Saturday morning, Potter, my office." "But, sir," said Harry, looking up desperately, "Quidditch, the last match of the—" 10 o'clock, whispered Snape with a smile that showed his yellow teeth. "Poor Gryffindor. 4th place this year, I fear." And he left the bathroom without another word, leaving Harry to stare into the cracked mirror, feeling sicker, he was sure, than Ron had ever felt in his life. "I won't say I told you so," said Hermione an hour later in the common room. "Leave it, Hermione," said Ron angrily. Harry had never made it to dinner. He had no appetite at all. He had just finished telling Ron, Hermione, and Ginny what had happened. Not that there seemed to have been much need. The news had traveled very fast. Apparently, Moaning Myrtle had taken it upon herself to pop up in every bathroom in the castle to tell the story. Malfoy had already been visited in the hospital wing by Pansy Parkinson, who had lost no time in vilifying Harry far and wide, and Snape had told the staff precisely what had happened. Harry had already been called out of the common room to endure 15 highly unpleasant minutes in the company of Professor McGonagall, who had told him he was lucky not to have been expelled, and that she supported wholeheartedly Snape's punishment of detention every Saturday until the end of term. "I told you there was something wrong with that Prince person," Hermione said, evidently unable to stop herself. "And I was right, wasn't I?" "No, I don't think you were," said Harry stubbornly. He was having a bad enough time without Hermione lecturing him. The looks on the Gryffindor's team's faces when he had told them he would not be able to play on Saturday had been the worst punishment of all. He could feel Ginny's eyes on him now, but he did not meet them. He did not want to see disappointment or anger there. He had just told her that she would be playing Seeker on Saturday and that Dean would be rejoining the team as Chaser in her place. Perhaps if they won, Ginny and Dean would make up during the post-match euphoria. The thought went through Harry like an icy knife. "Harry," said Hermione, "how can you still stick up for that book when that spell—" "Will you stop harping on about the book?" snapped Harry. "The prince only copied it out. It's not like he was advising anyone to use it. For all we know, he was making a note of something that had been used against him." "I don't believe this," said Hermione. "You're actually defending—" "I'm not defending what I did," said Harry quickly. "I wish I hadn't done it, and not just because I've got about a dozen detentions. You know I wouldn't have used a spell like that, not even on Malfoy. But you can't blame the prince. He hadn't written, 'Try this out, it's really good.' He was just making notes for himself, wasn't he? Not for anybody else." Are you telling me, said Hermione, that you're going to go back and get the book? Yeah, I am, said Harry forcefully. Listen, without the prince, I'd never have won Felix Felicis. I'd never have known how to save Ron from poisoning. I'd never have gotten a reputation for potions brilliance you don't deserve, said Hermione nastily. Give it a rest, Hermione, said Ginny. And Harry was so amazed, so grateful. He looked up. By the sound of it, Malfoy was trying to use an unforgivable curse, so you should be glad Harry had something good up his sleeve. Well, of course I'm glad Harry wasn't cursed, said Hermione, clearly stung. But you can't call that second Semper spell good, Ginny. Look where it's landed him. And I'd have thought, seeing what this has done to your chances in the match... Oh, don't start acting as if you understand Quidditch, snapped Ginny. You'll only embarrass yourself. Harry and Ron stared. Hermione and Ginny, who had always got on together very well, were now sitting with their arms folded, glaring in opposite directions. Ron looked nervously at Harry, then snatched up a book at random and hid behind it. Harry, however, little though he knew he deserved it, felt unbelievably cheerful all of a sudden, even though none of them spoke again for the rest of the evening. His lightheartedness was short-lived. There were Slytherin taunts to be endured next day, not to mention much anger from fellow Gryffindors who were most unhappy that their captain had got himself banned from the final match of the season. By Saturday morning, whatever he might have told Hermione, Harry would gladly have exchanged all the Felix Felicis in the world to be walking down to the Quidditch pitch with Ron, Ginny, and the others. It was almost unbearable to turn away from the mass of students streaming out into the sunshine, all of them wearing rosettes and hats and brandishing banners and scarves to descend the stone steps into the dungeons and walk into the distant sounds of the crowd were quite obliterated, knowing that he would not be able to hear a word of commentary or a cheer or groan. Ah, Potter, said Snape when Harry had knocked on his door and entered the unpleasantly familiar office that Snape, despite teaching floors above now, had not vacated. It was as dimly lit as ever, and the same slimy dead objects were suspended in colored potions all around the walls. Ominously, there were many cobwebbed boxes piled on a table where Harry was clearly supposed to sit. They had an aura of tedious, hard, and pointless work about them. Mr. Filch has been looking for someone to clear out these old files, said Snape softly. They are records of other Hogwarts wrongdoers and their punishments. Where the ink has grown faint, or the cards have suffered damage from mice, we would like you to copy out the crimes and punishments afresh, and, making sure that they are in alphabetical order, replace them in the boxes. You will not use magic. Right, Professor, said Harry with as much contempt as he could put into the last 3 syllables. I thought you could start, said Snape, a malicious smile on his lips, with boxes 1012 to 1056. You will find some familiar names in there, which should add interest to the task. Here, you see. He pulled out a card from one of the topmost boxes with a flourish and read, James Potter and Sirius Black, apprehended using an illegal hex upon Bertram Aubrey. Aubrey's head twice normal size, double detention. Snape sneered. It must be such a comfort to think that though they are gone, a record of their greatest achievements remains. Harry felt the familiar boiling sensation in the pit of his stomach. Biting his tongue to prevent himself retaliating, he sat down in front of the boxes and pulled one toward him. It was, as Harry had anticipated, useless, boring work, punctured, as Snape had clearly planned, with the regular jolt in the stomach that meant he had just read his father or Sirius's names, usually coupled together in various petty misdeeds, occasionally accompanied by those of Remus Lupin and Peter Pettigrew. And while he copied out all their various offenses and punishments, he wondered what was going on outside, where the match would have just started. Ginny playing Seeker against Cho. Harry glanced again and again at the large clock ticking on the wall. It seemed to be moving half as fast as a regular clock. Perhaps Snape had bewitched it to go extra slowly. He could not have been here for only half an hour. An hour? An hour and a half? Harry's stomach started rumbling when the clock showed 12:30. Snape, who had not spoken at all since setting Harry this task, finally looked up at 1:10. I think that will do, he said coldly. Mark the place you have reached. You will continue at 10 o'clock next Saturday. Yes, sir. Harry stuffed a bent card into the box at random and hurried out of the door before Snape could change his mind, racing back up the stone steps, straining his ears to hear a sound from the pitch. But all was quiet. It was over then. He hesitated outside the crowded Great Hall, then ran up the marble staircase. Whether Gryffindor had won or lost, the team usually celebrated or commiserated in their own common room. "Quid agis?" he said tentatively to the fat lady, wondering what he would find inside. Her expression was unreadable as she replied, "You'll see." And she swung forward. A roar of celebration erupted from the hole behind her. Harry gaped as people began to scream at the sight of him. Several hands pulled him into the room. "We won!" yelled Ron, bounding into sight and brandishing the silver cup at Harry. "We won! 450 to 140! We won!" Harry looked around. There was Ginny running toward him. She had a hard, blazing look in her face as she threw her arms around him. And without thinking, without planning it, without worrying about the fact that 50 people were watching, Harry kissed her. After several long moments, or it might have been half an hour, or possibly several sunlit days, they broke apart. The room had gone very quiet. Then several people wolf whistled, and there was an outbreak of nervous giggling. Harry looked over the top of Ginny's head to see Dean Thomas holding a shattered glass in his hand, and Romilda Vane looking as though she might throw something. Hermione was beaming, but Harry's eyes sought Ron. At last he found him, still clutching the cup and wearing an expression appropriate to having been clubbed over the head. For a fraction of a second, they looked at each other. Then Ron gave a tiny jerk of the head that Harry understood to mean, "Well, if you must." The creature in his chest roaring in triumph, he grinned down at Ginny and gestured wordlessly out of the portrait hole. A long walk in the grounds seemed indicated, during which, if they had time, they might discuss the match. Chapter 25. The Seer Overheard. The fact that Harry Potter was going out with Ginny Weasley seemed to interest a great number of people, most of them girls, yet Harry found himself newly and happily impervious to gossip over the next few weeks. After all, it made a very nice change to be talked about because of something that was making him happier than he could remember being for a long time, rather than because he had been involved in horrific scenes of dark magic. "You'd think people had better things to gossip about," said Ginny as she sat on the common room floor, leaning against Harry's legs and reading the Daily Prophet. 3 Dementor attacks in a week, and all Romilda Vane does is ask me if it's true you've got a hippogriff tattooed across your chest." Ron and Hermione both roared with laughter. Harry ignored them. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it's a Hungarian horntail," said Ginny, turning a page of the newspaper idly. Much more macho. "Thanks," said Harry, grinning. "And what did you tell her Ron's got?" "Pygmy puff, but I didn't say where." Ron scowled as Hermione rolled around laughing. "Watch it," he said, pointing warningly at Harry and Ginny. "Just because I've given my permission doesn't mean I can't withdraw it." "Your permission?" scoffed Ginny. "Since when did you give me permission to do anything? Anyway, you said yourself you'd rather it was Harry than Michael or Dean." "Yeah, I would," said Ron grudgingly. "Just as long as you don't start snogging each other in public." "You filthy hypocrite! What about you and Lavender thrashing around like a pair of eels all over the place?" demanded Ginny. But Ron's tolerance was not to be tested much as they moved into June, for Harry and Ginny's time together was becoming increasingly restricted. Ginny's OWLs were approaching, and she was therefore forced to study for hours into the night. And on one such evening when Ginny had retired to the library, Harry was sitting beside the window in the common room, supposedly finishing his herbology homework, but in reality reliving a particularly happy hour he had spent down by the lake with Ginny at lunchtime. Hermione dropped into the seat between him and Ron with an unpleasantly purposeful look on her face. "I want to talk to you, Harry." "What about?" said Harry suspiciously. Only the previous day Hermione had told him off for distracting Ginny when she ought to be working hard for her examinations. "The so-called Half-Blood Prince." "Oh, not again," he groaned. "Will you please drop it?" He had not dared to return to the room of requirement to retrieve his book, and his performance in potions was suffering accordingly, though Slughorn, who approved of Ginny, had jocularly attributed this to Harry being lovesick. But Harry was sure that Snape had not yet given up hope of laying hands on the prince's book, and was determined to leave it where it was while Snape remained on the lookout. "I'm not dropping it," said Hermione firmly, "until you've heard me out. Now, I've been trying to find out a bit about who might make a hobby of inventing dark spells. He didn't make a hobby of it. He. Who says it's a he?" "We've been through this," said Harry crossly. "Prince, Hermione, Prince." "Right," said Hermione, red patches blazing in her cheeks as she pulled a very old piece of newsprint out of her pocket and slammed it down on the table in front of Harry. "Look at that! Look at that picture!" Harry picked up the crumbling piece of paper and stared at the moving photograph, yellowed with age. Ron leaned over for a look too. The picture showed a skinny girl of around 15. She was not pretty. She looked simultaneously cross and sullen, with heavy brows and a long, pallid face. Underneath the photograph was the caption, "Eileen Prince, captain of the Hogwarts Gobstones team." "So?" said Harry, scanning the short news item to which the picture belonged. It was a rather dull story about inter-school competitions. "Her name was Eileen Prince. Prince, Harry." They looked at each other, and Harry realized what Hermione was trying to say. He burst out laughing. "No way! What? You think she was the half-blood? Oh, come on. Well, why not, Harry? There aren't any real princes in the wizarding world. It's either a nickname, a made-up title somebody's given themselves, or it could be their actual name, couldn't it? No, listen! If, say, her father was a wizard whose surname was Prince, and her mother was a muggle, then that would make her a half-blood prince." "Yeah, very ingenious, Hermione." "But it would! Maybe she was proud of being half a prince." "Listen, Hermione, I can tell it's not a girl. I can just tell." "The truth is, you don't think a girl would have been clever enough," said Hermione angrily. "How can I have hung around with you for 5 years and not think girls are clever?" said Harry, stung by this. "It's the way he writes. I just know the prince was a bloke. I can tell. This girl hasn't got anything to do with it." "Where did you get this, anyway?" "The library," said Hermione predictably. "There's a whole collection of old prophets up there. Well, I'm going to find out more about Eileen Prince if I can." "Enjoy yourself," said Harry irritably. "I will," said Hermione. "And the first place I'll look," she shot at him as she reached the portrait hole, "is records of old potions awards." Harry scowled after her for a moment, then continued his contemplation of the darkening sky. "She just never got over you outperforming her in potions," said Ron, returning to his copy of 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi. "You don't think I'm mad wanting that book back, do you?" "Course not," said Ron robustly. "He was a genius, the prince. Anyway, without his Bezoar tip," he drew his fingers significantly across his own throat, "I wouldn't be here to discuss it, would I? I mean, I'm not saying that spell you used on Malfoy was great." "Nor am I," said Harry quickly. "But he healed all right, didn't he? Back on his feet in no time." "Yeah," said Harry. This was perfectly true, although his conscience squirmed slightly all the same. Thanks to Snape. "You still got detention with Snape this Saturday?" Ron continued. "Yeah, and the Saturday after that, and the Saturday after that," sighed Harry. "And he's hinting now that if I don't get all the boxes done by the end of term, we'll carry on next year." He was finding these detentions particularly irksome because they cut into the already limited time he could have been spending with Ginny. Instead, he had frequently wondered lately whether Snape did not know this, for he was keeping Harry later and later every time, while making pointed asides about Harry having to miss the good weather and the varied opportunities it offered. Harry was shaken from these bitter reflections by the appearance at his side of Jimmy Peakes, who was holding out a scroll of parchment. "Oh, thanks, Jimmy." "Hey, it's from Dumbledore," said Harry excitedly, unrolling the parchment and scanning it. "He wants me to go to his office as quick as I can." They stared at each other. "Blimey," said Ron. "You don't reckon he hasn't found—" "Better go and see, hadn't I?" said Harry, jumping to his feet. He hurried out of the common room and along the 7th floor as fast as he could, passing nobody but Peeves, who swooped past in the opposite direction, throwing bits of chalk at Harry in a routine sort of way, and cackling loudly as he dodged Harry's defensive jinx. Once Peeves had vanished, there was silence in the corridors. With only 15 minutes left until curfew, most people had already returned to their common rooms. And then Harry heard a scream and a crash. He stopped in his tracks, listening. "How dare you! Ah!" The noise was coming from a corridor nearby. Harry sprinted toward it, his wand at the ready, hurtled around another corner, and saw Professor Trelawney sprawled upon the floor, her head covered in one of her many shawls, several sherry bottles lying beside her, one broken. "Professor!" Harry hurried forward and helped Professor Trelawney to her feet. Some of her glittering beads had become entangled with her glasses. She hiccuped loudly, patted her hair, and pulled herself up on Harry's helping arm. "What happened, Professor?" "You may well ask," she said shrilly. "I was strolling along, brooding upon the certain dark portents I happened to have glimpsed." But Harry was not paying much attention. He had just noticed where they were standing. There on the right was the tapestry of dancing trolls, and on the left, that smoothly impenetrable stretch of stone wall that concealed— "Professor, were you trying to get into the room of requirement?" "Omens I have been vouchsafed—" "What?" She had looked suddenly shifty. "The room of requirement," repeated Harry. "Were you trying to get in there?" I didn't know students knew about. Not all of them do, said Harry. But what happened? You screamed. It sounded as though you were hurt. Well, said Professor Trelawney, drawing her shawls around herself defensively and staring down at him with her vast, magnified eyes. I wish to deposit certain items personally in the room. And she muttered something about nasty accusations. Right, said Harry, glancing down at the sherry bottles. But you couldn't get in and hide them? He found this very odd. The room had opened for him, after all, when he had wanted to hide the Half-Blood Prince's book. Oh, I got in all right, said Professor Trelawney, glaring at the wall. But there was somebody already in there. Somebody in... Who? Demanded Harry. Who was in there? I have no idea, said Professor Trelawney, looking slightly taken aback at the urgency in Harry's voice. I walked into the room and I heard a voice, which has never happened before in all my years of using the room. I mean, a voice saying what? I don't know what it was saying, said Professor Trelawney. It was whooping. Whooping? Gleefully, she said, nodding. Harry stared at her. Was it male or female? I would hazard a guess at male, said Professor Trelawney. And it sounded happy? Very happy, said Professor Trelawney sniffily. As though it was celebrating? Most definitely. And then I called out, Who's there? You couldn't have found out who it was without asking? Harry asked her, slightly frustrated. The inner eye, said Professor Trelawney with dignity, straightening her shawls and many strands of glittering beads, was fixed upon matters well outside the mundane realms of whooping voices. Right, said Harry hastily. He had heard about Professor Trelawney's inner eye all too often before. And did the voice say who was there? No, it did not, she said. Everything went pitch black, and the next thing I knew I was being hurled out head first in the room. And you didn't see that coming? Said Harry, unable to help himself. No, I did not. As I say, it was pitch... She stopped and glared at him suspiciously. I think you better tell Professor Dumbledore, said Harry. He ought to know Malfoy's celebrating. I mean, that someone threw you out of the room. To his surprise, Professor Trelawney drew herself up at this suggestion, looking haughty. The headmaster has intimated that he would prefer fewer visits from me, she said coldly. I'm not one to press my company upon those who do not value it. If Dumbledore chooses to ignore the warnings the cards show... Her bony hand closed suddenly around Harry's wrists, again and again, no matter how I lay them out. And she pulled a card dramatically from underneath her shawls. The lightning-struck tower, she whispered. Calamity, disaster, coming nearer all the time. Right, said Harry again. Well, I still think you should tell Dumbledore about this voice, and everything going dark and being thrown out of that room. You think so? Professor Trelawney seemed to consider the matter for a moment, but Harry could tell that she liked the idea of retelling her little adventure. I'm going to see him right now, said Harry. I've got a meeting with him. We could go together. Oh, well, in that case, said Professor Trelawney with a smile. She bent down, scooped up her sherry bottles, and dumped them unceremoniously in a large blue and white vase standing in a nearby niche. I miss having you in my classes, Harry, she said soulfully as they set off together. You were never much of a seer, but you were a wonderful object. Harry did not reply. He had loathed being the object of Professor Trelawney's continual predictions of doom. I am afraid, she went on, that the centaur knows nothing of cartomancy. I asked him, one seer to another, had he not too sensed the distant vibration of coming catastrophe? But he seemed to find me almost comical. Yes, comical. Her voice rose rather hysterically, and Harry caught a powerful whiff of sherry, even though the bottles had been left behind. Perhaps the horse has heard people say that I have not inherited my great-great-grandmother's gift. Those rumours have been bandied about by the jealous for years. You know what I say to such people, Harry. Would Dumbledore have let me teach at this great school? Put so much trust in me all these years, had I not proved myself to him? Harry mumbled something indistinct. I well remember my first interview with Dumbledore, went on Professor Trelawney in throaty tones. He was deeply impressed, of course. Deeply impressed. I was staying at the Hogshead, which I do not advise, incidentally. Bedbugs, dear boy. But funds were low. He questioned me. I must confess that at first I thought he seemed ill-disposed toward divination, and I remember I started to feel a little odd. I had not eaten much that day, but then... And now Harry was paying attention properly for the first time, for he knew what had happened then. Professor Trelawney had made the prophecy that had altered the course of his whole life, the prophecy about him and Voldemort. But then, we were rudely interrupted by Severus Snape. What? Yes, there was a commotion outside the door, and it flew open, and there was that rather uncouth barman standing with Snape, who was waffling about having come the wrong way up the stairs, although I'm afraid that I myself rather thought he had been apprehended eavesdropping on my interview with Dumbledore. You see, he himself was seeking a job at that time, and no doubt hoped to pick up tips. Well, after that, Dumbledore seemed much more disposed to give me the job, and I could not help thinking, Harry, that it was because he appreciated the stark contrast between my own unassuming manners and quiet talent compared to the pushing, thrusting young man who was prepared to listen to keyholes. Harry, dear? She looked back over her shoulder, having only just realized that Harry was no longer with her. He had stopped walking, and they were now 10 feet from each other. Harry? She repeated uncertainly. Perhaps his face was white to make her look so concerned and frightened. Harry was standing stock still as waves of shock crashed over him, wave after wave, obliterating everything except the information that had been kept from him for so long. It was Snape who had overheard the prophecy. It was Snape who had carried the news of the prophecy to Voldemort. Snape and Peter Pettigrew together had sent Voldemort hunting after Lily and James and their son. Nothing else mattered to Harry just now. Harry, said Professor Trelawney again. Harry, I thought we were going to see the headmaster together. You stay here, said Harry through numb lips. But dear, I was going to tell him how I was assaulted in the room of... You stay here, Harry repeated angrily. She looked alarmed as he ran past her around the corner into Dumbledore's corridor, where the lone gargoyle stood sentry. Harry shouted the password at the gargoyle and ran up the moving spiral staircase 3 steps at a time. He did not knock upon Dumbledore's door. He hammered, and the calm voice answered, Enter, after Harry had already flung himself into the room. Fawkes the Phoenix looked around, his bright black eyes gleaming with reflected gold from the sunset beyond the windows. Dumbledore was standing at the window looking out of the grounds, a long black travelling cloak in his arms. Well, Harry, I promised that you could come with me. For a moment or two, Harry did not understand. The conversation with Trelawney had driven everything out of his head, and his brain seemed to be moving very slowly. Come with you? Only if you wish it, of course. If I... And then Harry remembered why he had been eager to come to Dumbledore's office in the first place. Wait, you found one? You found a Horcrux? I believe so. Rage and resentment fought shock and excitement. For several moments, Harry could not speak. It is natural to be afraid, said Dumbledore. I'm not scared, said Harry at once, and it was perfectly true. Fear was one emotion he was not feeling at all. Which Horcrux is it? Where is it? I'm not sure which it is, though I think we can rule out the snake. But I believe it to be hidden in a cave on the coast many miles from here. A cave I have been trying to locate for a very long time. The cave in which Tom Riddle once terrorized 2 children from his orphanage on their annual trip. You remember? Yes, said Harry. How is it protected? I do not know. I have my suspicions that may be entirely wrong. Dumbledore hesitated, then said, Harry, I promised you that you could come with me, and I stand by that promise. But it would be very wrong of me not to warn you that this will be exceedingly dangerous. I'm coming, said Harry almost before Dumbledore had finished speaking. Boiling with anger at Snape, his desire to do something desperate and risky had increased tenfold in the last few minutes. This seemed to show on Harry's face, for Dumbledore moved away from the window and looked more closely at Harry, a slight crease between his silver eyebrows. What has happened to you? Nothing, lied Harry promptly. What has upset you? I'm not upset. Harry, you were never a good occlumens. That word was the spark that ignited Harry's fury. Snape, he said very loudly, and Fawkes gave a soft squawk behind them. Snape's what happened. He told Voldemort about the prophecy. It was him. He listened outside the door. Trelawney told me. Dumbledore's expression did not change, but Harry thought his face whitened under the bloody tinge cast by the setting sun. For a long moment, Dumbledore said nothing. When did you find out about this? He asked at last. Just now, said Harry, who was refraining from yelling with enormous difficulty. And then suddenly he could not help himself. And you let him teach here! And he told Voldemort to go after my mom and dad! Breathing hard as though he was fighting, Harry turned away from Dumbledore, who still had not moved a muscle, and paced up and down the study, rubbing his knuckles on his hand and exercising every last bit of restraint to prevent himself knocking things over. He wanted to rage and storm at Dumbledore, but he also wanted to go with him and trying to destroy the Horcrux. He wanted to tell him that he was a foolish old man for trusting Snape, but he was terrified that Dumbledore would not take him along unless he mastered his anger. "Harry," said Dumbledore quietly, "please listen to me." It was as difficult to stop his relentless pacing as to refrain from shouting. Harry paused, biting his lip, and looked into Dumbledore's lined face. "Professor Snape made a terrible—" "Don't tell me it was a mistake, sir. He was listening at the door. Please let me finish." Dumbledore waited until Harry had nodded curtly and then went on. "Professor Snape made a terrible mistake. He was still in Lord Voldemort's employ on the night he heard the first half of Professor Trelawney's prophecy. Naturally, he hastened to tell his master what he had heard, for it concerned his master most deeply. But he did not know, he had no possible way of knowing, which boy Voldemort would hunt from then onward, or that the parents he would destroy in his murderous quest were people that Professor Snape knew, that they were your mother and father." Harry let out a yell of mirthless laughter. He hated my dad like he hated Sirius. Haven't you noticed, Professor, how the people Snape hates tend to end up dead? You have no idea the remorse Professor Snape felt when he realized how Lord Voldemort had interpreted the prophecy, Harry. I believe it to be the greatest regret of his life, and the reason that he returned. But he's a very good Occlumens, isn't he, sir? Said Harry, whose voice was shaking with the effort of keeping it steady. And isn't Voldemort convinced that Snape's on his side even now? Professor, how can you be sure Snape's on our side? Dumbledore did not speak for a moment. He looked as though he was trying to make up his mind about something. At last, he said, I am sure. I trust Severus Snape completely. Harry breathed deeply for a few moments in an effort to steady himself. It did not work. Well, I don't, he said as loudly as before. He's up to something with Draco Malfoy right now, right under your nose, and you still... We have discussed this, Harry, said Dumbledore. Now he sounded stern again. I have told you my views. You are leaving the school tonight, and I'll bet you haven't even considered that Snape and Malfoy might decide to... To what? Said Dumbledore, his eyebrows raised. What is it that you suspect them of doing, precisely? They're up to something, said Harry, and his hands curled into fists as he said it. Professor Trelawney was just in the room of requirement, trying to hide her sherry bottles, and she heard Malfoy whooping, celebrating. He's trying to mend something dangerous in there, and if you ask me, he's fixed it at last, and you're about to just walk out of the school without... Enough, said Dumbledore. He said it quite calmly, and yet Harry fell silent at once. He knew that he had finally crossed some invisible line. Do you think that I've once left the school unprotected during my absences this year? I have not. Tonight, when I leave here, there will be, again, additional protection in place. Please do not suggest that I do not take the safety of my students seriously, Harry. I didn't, mumbled Harry, a little abashed, but Dumbledore cut across him. I do not wish to discuss this matter any further. Harry bit back his retort, scared that he had gone too far, that he had ruined his chance of accompanying Dumbledore. But Dumbledore went on. Do you wish to come with me tonight? Yes, said Harry at once. Very well then. Listen. Dumbledore drew himself up to his full height. I take you with me on one condition, that you obey any command I might give you at once and without question. Of course. Be sure to understand me, Harry. I mean that you must follow even such orders as run, hide, or go back. Do I have your word? Yes, of course. If I tell you to hide, you will do so. Yes. If I tell you to flee, you will obey. Yes. If I tell you to leave me and save yourself, you will do as I tell you. Harry? They looked at each other for a moment. Yes, sir. Very good. Then I wish you to go and fetch your invisibility cloak and meet me in the entrance hall in 5 minutes' time. Dumbledore turned back to look out of the fiery window. The sun was now a ruby-red glare along the horizon. Harry walked quickly from the office and down the spiral staircase. His mind was oddly clear all of a sudden. He knew what to do. Ron and Hermione were sitting together in the common room when he came back. "What does he want?" Hermione said at once. "Harry, are you okay?" she added anxiously. "I'm fine," said Harry shortly, racing past them. He dashed up the stairs and into his dormitory, where he flung open his trunk and pulled out the Marauders map and a pair of balled-up socks. Then he sped back down the stairs and entered the common room, skidding to a halt where Ron and Hermione sat, looking stunned. "I've got to be quick," Harry panted. "Dumbledore thinks I'm getting my invisibility cloak. Listen." Quickly he told them where he was going and why. He did not pause either for Hermione's gasps of horror or for Ron's hasty questions. They could work out the finer details for themselves. "So you see what this means?" Harry finished at a gallop. "Dumbledore won't be here tonight, so Malfoy's going to have another clear shot at whatever he's up to." "No, listen to me!" he hissed angrily as both Ron and Hermione showed every sign of interrupting. "I know it was Malfoy celebrating in the Room of Requirement. Here!" He shoved the Marauders map into Hermione's hands. "You've got to watch him, and you've got to watch Snape, too. Use anyone else who you can rustle up from the DA. Hermione, those contact galleons will still work, right? Dumbledore says he's put extra protection in the school, but if Snape's involved, he'll know what Dumbledore's protection is and how to avoid it. But he won't be expecting you lots to be on watch, will he?" "Harry," began Hermione, her eyes huge with fear. "I haven't got time to argue," said Harry curtly. "Take this as well." He thrust the socks into Ron's hands. "Thanks," said Ron. Why do I need socks?" "You need what's wrapped in them. It's the Felix Felicis. Share it between yourselves and Ginny, too. Say goodbye to her for me. I better go. Dumbledore's waiting." "No," said Hermione, as Ron unwrapped the tiny little bottle of golden potion, looking awestruck. "We don't want it. You take it. Who knows what you're going to be facing?" "I'll be fine. I'll be with Dumbledore," said Harry. "I want to know that you lot are okay. Don't look like that, Hermione. I'll see you later." And he was off, hurrying back through the portrait hole and toward the entrance hall. Dumbledore was waiting beside the oaken front doors. He turned as Harry came skidding out onto the topmost stone step, panting hard, a searing stitch in his side. "I would like you to wear your cloak, please," said Dumbledore. And he waited until Harry had thrown it on before saying, "Very good. Shall we go?" Dumbledore set off at once down the stone steps, his own traveling cloak barely stirring in the still summer air. Harry hurried alongside him under the invisibility cloak, still panting and sweating rather a lot. "But what will people think when they see you leaving, Professor?" Harry asked, his mind on Malfoy and Snape. "That I am off into Hogsmeade for a drink," said Dumbledore lightly. "I sometimes offer Rosmerta my custom, or else visit the Hogshead. Or I appear to. It is a good way of any disguising the true intentions." They made their way down the drive in the gathering twilight. The air was full of the smells of warm grass, lake water, and wood smoke from Hagrid's cabin. It was difficult to believe that they were heading for anything dangerous or frightening. "Professor," said Harry quietly as the gates at the bottom of the drive came into view, "will we be apparating?" "Yes," said Dumbledore. "You can apparate now, I believe." "Yes," said Harry, "but I haven't got a license." He felt it best to be honest. What if he spoiled everything by turning up 100 miles from where he was supposed to go? "No matter," said Dumbledore. "I can assist you again." They turned out of the gates into the twilight deserted lane to Hogsmeade. Darkness descended fast as they walked, and by the time they reached the high street, night was falling in earnest. Lights twinkled from windows over shops, and as they neared the Three Broomsticks, they heard raucous shouting. "And stay out!" shouted Madame Rosmerta, forcibly ejecting a grubby-looking wizard. "Oh, hello, Albus. You're out late." "Good evening, Rosmerta, good evening. Forgive me, I'm off to the Hogshead. No offense, but I feel like a quieter atmosphere tonight." A minute later they turned the corner into the side street, where the Hogshead's sign creaked a little, though there was no breeze. In contrast to the Three Broomsticks, the pub appeared to be completely empty. "It will not be necessary for us to enter," muttered Dumbledore, glancing around, "as long as nobody sees us go. Now, place your hand upon my arm, Harry. There is no need to grip too hard. I am merely guiding you. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Harry turned. At once there was that horrible sensation that he was being squeezed through a thick rubber tube. He could not draw breath. Every part of him was being compressed almost past endurance. And then, just when he thought he must suffocate, the invisible bands seemed to burst open, and he was standing in cool darkness, breathing in lungfuls of fresh, salty air.